The wind had teeth that night. It came down from the mountains in long hollow howls, rattling the black pines and sweeping the snow across the open stretches of land like a white tide with no shore. In the distance, the peaks rose jagged as broken glass, their crowns swallowed by a sky the color of ash. The earth itself seemed to shiver beneath the weight of the storm. It was a night made for endings. Through that wilderness staggered a man. His name was Jedediah Boone, and the dark stain spreading across the front of his buckskin coat told its own grim tale. His breath came in ragged bursts, clouding in the freezing air. He carried no rifle now, no traps slung across his back, only a bundle held close to his chest, two tiny forms wrapped in buffalo hide. The twins stirred weakly, their cries small against the scream of the storm. Jedediah's boots dragged furrows in the snow, his legs trembling with each step. He knew his time had nearly bled out of him. The shot that tore through his side was fatal, and though he had bound it with strips of cloth, the wound burned with the hot finality of death. Still he walked, not for himself but for them. The trees opened to reveal a faint glow, the pale smoke of a chimney, the orange flicker of firelight spilling against snow. He pushed toward it, heart pounding with what strength remained, and at last stumbled into the clearing where a small log cabin crouched against the storm. Its roof sagged beneath the weight of snow, but its windows glowed warmly, defiant against the cold. Jedediah's knees gave way in the drift before the cabin steps. His vision blurred, the world spun in circles of white and red. With the last of his breath, he pounded his fist against the door. It opened not to a burly settler but to a woman, slender, with hair dark as crow feathers falling from beneath a woolen shawl. Her eyes were green-gray, like river stone beneath ice. Surprise flickered across her face when she saw him collapse into the snow at her feet. "Please," Jedediah rasped, voice like gravel, "I've only hours, wounds won't mend. Take them. Take my twins." For a heartbeat the woman simply stood, framed by the warm glow of her fire-lit home. Her name was Maeve Callahan, though few spoke it kindly anymore. She had lived apart from town for near 2 winters now, ever since her husband's ruin and death had branded her with shame she never asked to carry. The neighbors whispered of curses, of bad luck clinging to her like smoke. She had come to believe them, and so she kept her distance, surviving in silence at the edge of the pines. Now, as snow swirled around her skirts, she stared down at the dying man and the fragile bundle he pressed forward. 2 infants, their cheeks flushed from cold, their tiny fists curling in restless sleep. Something deep within her chest, a place long closed off, trembled awake. "Please," Jedediah's voice broke, a raw whisper. His blood steamed against the snow. "Raise them free of my sins. Don't let the world take them." Maeve's hands shook as she bent to lift the children from his arms. The weight was light, yet it felt as though the whole of fate had been pressed into her grasp. The babies whimpered at the shift, burrowing against her shawl. She looked back at the man. His face, once strong, was gray beneath the beard. His eyes shone with the last embers of life, but in them she saw both sorrow and pleading. She knew then he would not last the night. "I have nothing," she whispered, the words spilling unbidden as though confessing to a priest. "I've nothing left to give." Jedediah's mouth curved, faint as a shadow of a smile. "You've got more than you know." His fingers fumbled at his neck, pulling free a small locket, tarnished and worn. He pressed it into her palm. Inside, a scrap of paper bore 2 names written in a rough but careful hand, Caleb and June. "Their names?" he murmured. Maeve's throat closed. She wanted to say she could not, that she was unfit, that the world would tear her apart for daring to raise another's blood. But the children stirred in her arms, their tiny warmth seeping into her bones. Jedediah's breath rattled. Snow fell heavier, muffling the world into stillness. She sank beside him, the twins cradled close, and reached for his hand. His grip was weak, but he clung to it as though tethered to life by her touch. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Just a while longer." Time slowed. The firelight from the cabin spilled over them, gilding the falling snow with gold. Jedediah's eyes grew distant, but before the final veil descended, he managed to breathe. "Tell them. I love them." Then the strength left him. His hands slackened. His head fell back into the snow and silence claimed him. Maeve sat unmoving, her breath fogging in the air, the weight of 2 infants anchoring her to the living. The storm swirled on, relentless. At last, when her tears had frozen on her cheeks, she rose. With trembling hands she covered the man's body with pine boughs and snow, marking the place with care. The grave was humble, but it bore the dignity of witness. Back in her cabin, the twins lay bundled by the hearth. The fire popped and hissed, shadows swaying across the log walls. Maeve fed them warm goat's milk with a cloth-wrapped spoon, whispering lullabies she had once sung to her own child, long ago before fever carried him away and left her arms empty. The melodies trembled in her throat, half-remembered, yet the babes calmed, their eyelids fluttering shut. She sat back, staring into the fire, heart heavy with both dread and wonder. She had not asked for this burden, yet already the cabin felt changed. The silence no longer pressed in on her like a punishment, it was filled with the soft breaths of the living. The next days blurred into a rhythm of survival. Maeve rose before dawn to cut wood, her breath pluming white in the frigid air. She boiled water, fed the goats, tended to the twins. Their cries pierced the stillness, but she found a strange comfort in the noise, proof that life still fought to grow even in the heart of winter. At night, she would sit by the window with Caleb in one arm and June in the other, watching the snow fall like endless feathers. She told them stories not of glory or conquest, but of small kindnesses. The neighbor who once mended her roof before turning away, the creek where wildflowers bloomed in summer, the memory of her mother humming as she baked bread. Words became prayers, weaving hope into the quiet. But the world beyond her cabin did not forget. In town, whispers stirred. A woman alone in the woods, suddenly with children? Some said she had stolen them. Others claimed it was proof of her cursed nature, that the devil himself had left her offspring in the snow. One evening, as Maeve hauled water from the frozen creek, she saw a figure on horseback watching from the tree line. The rider lingered, then turned away without a word. Fear prickled her spine. The world was coming closer, and it would demand answers she did not have. Still, when she returned to the cabin and found the twins smiling in their sleep, she felt a stubborn spark kindle in her chest. For the first time in years, she whispered aloud to the silence, "They will not be taken from me." The winter did not break quickly. It lingered, clinging to the mountains with a stubborn hand. Days stretched long and pale, nights crackled with frost so sharp it seemed the stars themselves might shatter. Yet within the cabin, a quiet transformation had begun. Maeve Callahan moved with new purpose. The twins had tethered her to the living world, binding her to its rhythms in a way grief never allowed. She rose with their cries, fed them, rocked them, learned the fragile language of their needs. Their eyes followed her with unspoken trust, their small fingers curling around her own as though to remind her she was not alone. Sometimes when she stared into the flames she saw Jedediah Boone's face, his last plea, his hand gone cold in hers. He had left her a burden, yes, but also a chance. And though the weight frightened her, she bore it with a kind of stubborn grace. Yet peace in the wilderness rarely lasts. By the time spring thaw crept into the valley, whispers from town had reached her ears. A trader passing by, more kind than most, carried the words with him like dust on his boots. "They say you've stolen children, Maeve. Folks don't take kindly to secrets in these parts." Her heart clenched. She had known gossip would come, but the sharpness of it still cut deep. It wasn't the children they distrusted, it was her. Maeve, the widow of a gambler who drank and lost his way. Maeve, whose baby had died. Maeve, who lived alone in the woods like a ghost. The world had long since written her as cursed, and now it sharpened that story into a blade. Still, necessity drove her into town when her stores thinned. She bundled the twins close and made the trek across the thawing trails. The streets were muddy, lined with wagons and townsfolk shaking winter's weariness from their bones. Heads turned as she passed. Murmurs buzzed like hornets. "There she is, the witch of the pines. Look at those babes. Don't look a whit like her. Mark my words, nothing good comes of that woman." Maeve kept her head high, though her cheeks burned. She moved through the general store with deliberate calm, buying flour, beans, a bit of salt pork. But as she turned, her gaze caught on a figure near the stove, Bartholomew Pike. He was a man built of bulk and shadow, his beard streaked with gray, his eyes sharp as a hawk's. His wealth was carved from land and cattle, but rumors told of darker dealings, debts collected with lead, men who vanished after crossing him. He leaned against the counter, watching her with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Fine children," he drawled, voice like oil poured on water. "Don't reckon they're yours, though. Boone's blood, if I had to wager." Maeve's pulse quickened. "They're under my care," she said, steady but quiet. Pike's grin widened. "Boone owed me more than he could pay. Seems to me his debt's still walking around in swaddling cloth. Maybe they belong with me." The words coiled like a snake in her gut. She gathered the twins tighter and walked past him, not answering. But she felt his gaze follow her out into the muddy street, heavy with promise. That night, as she laid Caleb and June in their cradle, unease gnawed at her. The cabin walls felt thin, the woods less protective than before. She set her rifle near the hearth, her hands trembling as she checked its powder. The attack came days later. Pike's hired men rode in at dusk, their horses stamping clouds of dust on the thawing ground. Maeve saw them through the narrow window, 3 silhouettes in wide hats, shadows stretching long across the clearing. Her heart thundered. The twins whimpered, sensing the tension. Maeve lifted the rifle, its weight unsteady in her grip. When the men dismounted and advanced, she threw the cabin door open and stood in the threshold. "Turn back," she said, voice low but firm. "These children aren't yours." The men smirked, stepping closer. One spat into the snow. "Pike says they are." Maeve's finger hovered near the trigger, though her hands shook. The silence stretched tight, broken only by the twins' muffled cries inside. She knew she could not win against them if it came to violence. But she also knew she could not yield. "Over my body," she whispered. Perhaps it was the steadiness in her eyes, or the weight of something unseen pressing down on that moment, but the men hesitated. Then hoofbeats broke the standoff. A rider galloped into the clearing, Marshal Everett Harlan. The sheriff was a man carved from weariness, his hair streaked silver though his frame was still strong. He reined his horse between Maeve and the intruders, his gaze sweeping coldly over the scene. "That's enough," he said. "You want to claim rights, Pike can come himself and put it before the court. Until then you'll leave her be." The men muttered but obeyed, mounting up and riding back into the woods. Maeve lowered her rifle, her breath ragged. The marshal studied her for a long moment. "You've made yourself a storm, Maeve," he said quietly. "But I reckon you've also found something worth standing for." When he left, the clearing felt heavier for the silence he left behind. Maeve sank to her knees, clutching the twins to her chest. They were trembling but alive. And so was she. Yet Pike was not finished. Weeks later, smoke rose against the sky, dark, acrid. Maeve burst from the cabin to find fire licking at the edge of her woodshed. Pike's men had returned under cover of night, torches in hand. She screamed, grabbing the rifle, but the blaze spread fast, heat scorching her face. This time the town came. Neighbors who had once whispered against her gathered at the edge of the clearing, drawn by the flames. Some stood with folded arms, watching as though waiting for her to fall. Others shifted uneasily, shame flickering in their eyes. Pike himself rode forward, his horse stamping restlessly. His voice rang over the crackle of fire. "Step aside, Maeve. You've no claim. Those children are mine to take." Maeve stood in the snow, smoke curling around her, the twins crying behind her in the cabin. Her rifle shook in her hands, but she planted her feet. Her voice broke, yet carried clear. "They are not yours. They never will be." A hush fell. Pike's men sneered, but something in Maeve's defiance caught hold of the crowd. For all her years of silence and exile, for all the whispers of curses, here she stood, unyielding. And slowly, one by one, townsfolk stepped forward. A woman who once turned her away brought a bucket of water. A man set his coat over the flames. Soon a line formed, quelling the fire with their own hands. Pike's face darkened. He called his men, but they shifted uneasily beneath the weight of so many eyes. At last, with a snarl, he yanked his reins and rode off, the others following in his wake. The fire smoldered into steam. Maeve's knees buckled, but she held herself upright, clutching the twins as though anchoring her soul. The crowd lingered in silence, then slowly dispersed, some casting her glances not of scorn, but of something nearer to respect. That night, when the twins finally slept, Maeve sat by the hearth, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the fire. She thought of Jedediah Boone, of his last words, of the trust he had placed in her weary hands. She thought of the gossip that had nearly broken her, and of the courage that had risen when there was no other choice. The cabin smelled of smoke and milk, of pine sap and ash. Outside, the snow melted into rivulets, carrying winter away. She bent over Caleb and June, brushing her lips against their foreheads. "You'll never be alone again," she whispered. "And neither will I." The night settled deep around her, but for the first time in years, Maeve felt no chill in her bones.